Welcome to From Manuscript to Ministry, created and produced by Elder William Moore, the podcast where faith meets the written word. Each week, your hosts David and Martha dive into powerful, self-published books by Christian authors who are boldly using their God-given voices to impact the kingdom. Whether you're an aspiring writer, a reader seeking spiritual growth, or a ministry leader in search of authentic resources, this is your space to be inspired, encouraged, and equipped. Let's explore today's featured book and uncover the life-changing message behind the manuscript.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're going to be tackling something I think a lot of us really struggle with. It's this myth, this paralyzing idea that you have to feel perfectly confident, perfectly ready before you're even allowed to take action.
Exactly. And it's an idea that just crushes potential. It breeds inaction, and it leaves you feeling like you're constantly failing some kind of test of inner strength.
It really does.
So our mission today is, well, it's pretty surgical. We're going to deep dive into the paradox of valor, this idea that you can be, simultaneously filled with fear and still be considered mighty, still be effective. And we're using a framework built around a really insightful definition of bravery from William Moore's analysis of the Book of Judges.
And this is so important for you, the learner, because think about it. Maybe you're navigating some intense professional uncertainty, a job change, a huge presentation, launching something new.
Or it could be personal.
Yeah.
Complex family stuff.
Yeah.
Tough financial decisions.
Right. Whatever the context is, if you're struggling with that internal doubt, with that fear, and you feel this pressure to look strong or put together, this conversation is for you. We're going to establish, based on this source material, that fear is absolutely not a disqualifier for growth. In fact, it might just be the opposite.
It might be a prerequisite. We have to change the mental model completely. Because true courage, as defined in the material we've been analyzing, it's not about the absence of that internal distress. It's simply the choice to show up, to move forward, even when the distress is undeniable, palpable, and, frankly, screaming at you to just stop.
So let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get to the heart of this, to build this new foundation, we have to go back to the source, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at Judges chapter 6, verse 12. It's this moment where the angel of the Lord greets a man named Gideon with just a phenomenal statement. He says, "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor."
Okay, so mighty man of valor. Let's unpack that for a second, because the context here is absolutely everything. When you hear a phrase like that, you picture, I don't know, a general on a horse, a hero standing over an enemy, right?
Totally. Someone ready for battle.
But if you actually look at the scene described in the text, that title is it's almost laughable. Who exactly was God talking to, and what was he doing at that moment?
He was talking to Gideon, and Gideon was performing an act of, pure desperation and fear. The source material really emphasizes this critical contrast.
Right.
He wasn't out there rallying troops or anything like that. He was hiding. Specifically, the text says he was threshing wheat. Now, normally that's something you do out in the open, like on a hilltop where the wind can just carry away the chaff. It's an open-air activity.
But where was he doing it?
In a wine press. And this detail, you just can't overlook it. A wine press is a deep, confined pit. It's either underground or has high walls. It is an incredibly awkward and profoundly inefficient place to process wheat.
So he's doing it in secret.
He's literally trying to be invisible. Why? Because he was absolutely terrified of the Midianites. They were these marauding raiders who were just intent on stealing every harvest they could find.
That is the ultimate setup for this paradox, isn't it? The scene is one of just profound active fear. Here's a man sacrificing efficiency, comfort, everything just to stay hidden and avoid being wiped out. And into that moment of anxiety, God delivers this immense high-status title, Mighty Man of Valor.
And that's where the real power is, right?
Yeah.
It's in the timing. God assigned him the identity, Mighty Man of Valor, before Gideon had done a single heroic thing, before he gathered an army, and long before he felt even remotely qualified. His identity was assigned to him in the winepress of his fear, not on the battlefield of his eventual victory.
And that brings us right to the core of it all, this distinction between your identity and your feeling at any given moment. Now, I can hear someone listening, maybe arguing that God only said that because, being omniscient, he knew Gideon's future successes, that it was really a promise based on future performance. But isn't that just a bit of a theological shortcut that kind of lets the rest of us off the hook?
That's a really good question, and a fair one. And the source analysis helps us address it by focusing on the present moment in the story. Even if we treat this purely as a psychological pattern, the distinction is still profound. The external affirmation of his potential was delivered despite his current internal emotional state. Gideon's identity wasn't dependent on his feelings of bravery, and it wasn't dependent on his external circumstances of being, hidden and inefficient.
So it's a total reorientation of where we get our sense of worth.
It is. The external circumstances, hiding in a pit, the Midianite threat, and his internal emotional reality, which was pure fear, none of that changed the identity that was spoken over him. And this principle, which we're sort of calling the Gideon principle, it provides this essential truth for anyone struggling with doubt. Your external circumstances or your internal feelings do not define your potential for valor.
It teaches us to stop waiting for that feeling of confidence. We wait to feel brave, we wait to feel ready, we wait for the anxiety to go down before we commit to that project or have that tough conversation or step into a role we feel totally unqualified for.
Yes.
But the Gideon principle just flips the script. It says the assignment of value, of potential, that comes first. It's an act of identity spoken into the situation, no matter what the current emotional readout or performance metrics say.
And if you translate that spiritual principle into modern relatable terms for the learner, it removes this huge, debilitating pressure. We live in a culture that is obsessed with self-sufficiency and emotional perfection. If you feel pressure to be perfectly composed, perfectly strong, perfectly organized before you take on a challenge, you will almost certainly be paralyzed. The gap between your ideal self and your current frightened self is just too big.
So the action starts before you achieve perfection. The foundation for courage is laid when you choose to listen to the identity you're called to, the mighty person of valor, and not the feeling that's currently screaming at you, the fearful person in the winepress.
Yes. And what's so fascinating here is that the preparation for the calling is actually happening while you're hiding. The fear itself becomes part of the training ground. It defines the stakes. I mean, if Gideon had been fearless from the start, the subsequent reliance on divine strategy and careful planning, all that would have been unnecessary. So the fear isn't a wall-blocking action. It's more like a boundary marker that clearly defines the precise location where courage and reliance on something greater than yourself is required to take the next step.
That reframing is key. The fear isn't proof that you shouldn't move. It's proof that the move you're about to make really, really matters. So this whole idea of Gideon hiding but still being called mighty, it leads us straight to this amazing definition of courage we're extracting today from the source material. We're moving beyond just the spiritual identity and looking at the practical definition. The quote from William Moore's analysis is this: "Bravery is the ability to face fear head-on. It is not the absence of fear."
And that simple sentence is a complete paradigm shift. It really is. It shifts bravery from being a descriptive emotional state to being a prescriptive ability, something you can develop.
And it just completely dismantles that myth, right? The pervasive cultural myth that brave people aren't afraid. Think about the personas we celebrate. The unflappable CEO, the politician who never sweats, the spiritual leader who just seems to operate from this state of Zen-like calm. We project fearlessness onto success.
But according to this definition, that projection is completely faulty. Because if bravery were the absence of fear, then really only those who are genuinely unaware of the risks, the reckless, the naive, maybe even the sociopathic, could be truly brave. But when you are fully aware of the risk, when the stakes are crystal clear, when your body is physiologically responding to a threat, and you still choose to engage, that is the core ability we're talking about. Bravery becomes a cognitive choice to move towards something even when every instinct is screaming at you to run away.
Okay, so if the definition of bravery actually requires the presence of fear, let's synthesize what that valor looks like in daily life, because it's often very different from the battlefields we read about in history books.
Yeah, the source material is very grounding here. It synthesizes this idea of bravery when fear is present into three key, often mundane, but profoundly demanding manifestations. So number one, sometimes it is quiet obedience.
Okay.
Number two, sometimes it is praying when you don't have answers. And number three, sometimes it is simply showing up again after disappointment.
Let's spend some time on these because they're not what you'd typically call heroic. Let's start with quiet obedience. That doesn't sound very grand or brave. What does that mean?
It means doing the right thing, the necessary thing, even when it's unpopular or unseen or carries a huge social cost. For example, maintaining your professional integrity when everyone else around you is cutting corners. That quiet obedience requires enormous internal fortitude because the fear isn't physical, it's social. It's the fear of judgment, the fear of missing out, the fear of standing alone. It is an act of valor against the noise of distraction or popular consensus.
I see. And the second one, praying when you don't have answers. This speaks directly to any learner out there struggling with information overload. We're trained to search, to analyze, to find the definitive solution. So when you're faced with genuine ambiguity, a medical uncertainty, financial chaos, a strategic deadlock at work, it takes courage to just admit you don't control the outcome.
Absolutely. The anxiety produced by that kind of uncertainty is crippling. And the brave choice in that context is to step away from the fruitless mental churning, that agonizing analysis paralysis, and to surrender the need for an immediate resolution. It's a spiritual and psychological discipline that replaces frenetic worry with calm trust, which is a massive act of emotional valor.
And that third one, showing up again after disappointment. To me, this one requires a huge, persistent dose of valor. Disappointment it's a corrosive emotion. It's the feeling that confirms your past efforts were wasted, and it acts as an immediate command to just retreat and conserve your resources. Don't try again.
Yes. So to choose to show up the next day, to make the next pitch, to launch the next endeavor, to offer forgiveness the next time someone hurts you, that demands a courage that is often completely invisible to the outside world. It requires overriding that negative data point from the past and deliberately reinvesting emotional energy into a very uncertain future.
So that sustained repetition in the face of emotional fatigue or failure, that's arguably the highest form of disciplined bravery.
I think so. It's proof that you refuse to let your past dictate your future. And this is the exact synthesis we need to give to our listener who's struggling with information overload. True courage is found in the small, consistent acts of forward motion, not in single, flashy, heroic events.
Okay, so we've established that fear doesn't disqualify us, but let's go a bit deeper into the role of fear itself. If it's not a stop sign, what is its purpose?
This is where the source provides a crucial aha moment that I think reframes the entire discussion. It says that fear does not disqualify an individual. Rather, it simply reveals the opportunity for faith to lead.
Okay, let's pause on that. That's a big one. Fear reveals the opportunity for faith to lead. So if fear is just a diagnostic tool, what does the source suggest we do after the diagnosis? How do we translate that realization into the next action?
Well, if fear is a diagnostic tool, it eliminates the specific path where you must lean on resources that are greater than your own current internal pool. It tells you exactly where your self-sufficiency ends and where reliance, whether that's on a divine source, a community, an internal commitment, must begin.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Yeah. Think of it this way. If you feel intense fear about your finances, that fear reveals the opportunity to apply wisdom, to seek external counsel, and to trust in provision, rather than simply panicking and hoarding. If you feel intense fear about a critical relationship, it reveals the opportunity for profound vulnerability or difficult forgiveness, both of which are high courage actions.
So instead of fear being a stop sign, it's more like a compass needle pointing directly toward the required leap of faith or action. By accepting fear as a revelation rather than a disqualifier, we stop fighting the feeling itself, which is often an impossible internal battle, and we start focusing on the subsequent required action. The brave person isn't the one who eradicates the fear. They're the one who acknowledges it, accepts the diagnosis, and then asks, okay, where does this fear tell me I need to move next?
That's it, exactly.
It's so easy to think of valor as this big dramatic thing, right? Like historical battles or rescue missions. But the reality for the vast majority of us is that fear is amplified by much more mundane yet persistent pressures. Things like economic anxiety, decision fatigue, fear of loss, fear of loneliness, or just that constant pressure of comparison. And our source material really grounds this definition. It says that bravery in these moments is the decision to still trust God in this moment.
And that decision, that conscious internal pivot from reaction, panic, freezing, retreating, to deliberate trust-based action, that's where true valor is forged. The battlefield shifts from the external world to the internal landscape of your will.
Since fear acts as that compass pointing toward the needed action, let's see where it points in our daily lives by exploring the case studies in the source material. These really illustrate what this quiet bravery looks like in action. Let's start with the listener anecdote about public speaking.
Right. So this listener, she was just, paralyzed by public exposure. She wrote that she was terrified of speaking in front of even a small group, yet she felt this deep, undeniable conviction that she needed to start a small Bible study. And that internal conflict created what you could call high-stakes anxiety.
And her fear manifested physically. She specifically mentioned that her hands would shake every single week when she stood up to speak. Now, this is crucial. A lot of people, seeing that physical sign, would interpret it as weakness or as a sign that they're just not cut out for this, and they'd quit because their body failed the confidence test.
But the act of bravery here wasn't the delivery of a flawless message. It wasn't about being perfectly eloquent. The act of bravery was sustained consistency. It was showing up every single week despite the physical proof of her internal fear. Her hands were shaking, signaling intense distress, yet her feet kept walking into that room, and her mouth kept speaking the words that were necessary.
That sustained, quiet consistency is the very definition of valor we're aiming for here. The expert analysis in the source material identifies this as a crystal clear example of valor seen by God, regardless of how nervous she appeared to the people in the room. They may have just seen a nervous leader, but the source suggests the divine saw a mighty woman of valor defying a paralyzing fear through quiet, consistent obedience.
Valor is not defined by confidence. It's defined by commitment. When you are committed to the task or the calling, the feeling of fear becomes secondary to the importance of the mission. The shaking hands just prove the magnitude of the courage that was required to proceed.
And then there's the second case study, the single father who wrote in, and this one. This one really hits home for a lot of people, I think, because it addresses the profound fatigue that comes with relentless, invisible responsibility. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a mighty man of valor. He reported feeling only tired and just worn down by the sheer weight of life.
And his acts of valor were not dramatic rescues or public speeches. They were the repetitive, grinding acts of duty that are performed without any external applause. Specifically, getting up every morning, preparing his children for school, making sure they were fed, and praying over them. These routine acts, performed in a state of depletion and emotional exhaustion, are the very definition of a faithfulness that demands valor.
This stresses that valor has to be sustainable and quiet. Otherwise, we disqualify everyone who is just struggling through a season of exhaustion or grief or financial strain. If we define bravery only as bursting forth with this newfound energy, we miss the entire point. This example confirms that grinding through the routine with commitment, even when your strength feels completely depleted, is an act of profound courage.
Because when you're exhausted, the temptation to quit, to cut corners, or to become resentful is immense. So choosing disciplined faithfulness over depletion and self-pity is an active pushback. It's a brave assertion that the commitments you've made still hold value, even when you feel like you have nothing left to give.
This framework helps us identify really specific, concrete ways that courage shows up in daily life. And the source material highlights 3 seemingly passive actions that are, in fact, incredibly active internal battles. They are resting, forgiving, and trusting with what you cannot control.
Right. And let's start with resting. Why would resting require valor? Because resting means facing the intense fear of falling behind. We live in this quantifiable, hyper-productive hustle culture that tells us our worth is directly tied to our output. So to rest is to trust that boundaries are healthy and that the world will not stop turning if you stop working for an afternoon.
So it requires an intentional defiance of the anxiety of productivity. The courageous person says, I am choosing to honor my internal state and my need for restoration, even though my to-do list is screaming at me. That's not passive at all. That's an active assertion of self-worth that is completely countercultural.
Then there's forgiving. This requires massive courage because it means letting go of the internal control you have over past pain. Forgiveness is a conscious relinquishing of the right to revenge, the right to bitterness, or the right to hold on to a narrative that justifies your anger.
And often we fear forgiveness because it feels like weakness, doesn't it? We fear that if we forgive, the person who hurt us will escape accountability, or that we're sacrificing our own protective boundaries. The act of forgiveness is an internal battle that chooses peace for yourself over the continued emotional punishment of another, or the preservation of your own resentment.
And the third one, trusting what you cannot control. It's the ultimate submission to uncertainty. It's walking away from the anxiety of micromanagement and allowing life to unfold without your constant, frantic intervention. That requires a depth of internal strength that far surpasses almost any physical act of bravery.
So these 3 actions, resting, forgiving, trusting, they are not passive. They are profoundly active, high-courage choices against our deepest insecurities regarding control, productivity, and pain.
Okay, so it's one thing to identify this paradox, that bravery is necessary when fear is present, but it's another thing entirely to find the resources to actually execute that bravery when your internal resource pool feels completely depleted. And this is so critical. This is why it's essential to understand that this kind of courage is never commanded in isolation. It is always, always supported by a profound promise. We see this foundation laid out so clearly in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. It says, Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you.
And that structure is key, isn't it? It's not just a self-help mantra like, be strong and courageous, now go figure out how to muster up the necessary self-confidence. The instruction is bracketed by the enabling clause, because the Lord your God goes with you. That because changes everything. The ability to act flows directly from the assurance of presence and support.
The analysis here is clear. Bravery flows from the assurance that you are not walking alone. The fear is overcome not by trying to find some latent reservoir of self-confidence deep within, but by trusting in an external promised presence. When you know you are supported, the risks inherent in the action diminish in their paralyzing effect, allowing you to move forward even if you don't feel subjectively strong in that moment.
And building on that foundation of promised presence, let's bring in the perfect antidote to the paralysis of fear, which is found in 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. This text says that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and a sound mind.
This concept is crucial for overcoming the disabling effect of fear, because it explicitly provides the 3 positive tools necessary to replace the negative void that fear creates. We have to first understand how fear functions to strip these 3 elements away from us.
Okay, let's break down that mechanism. How does fear strip away power?
Fear creates paralysis. It's often called analysis paralysis. When we're overwhelmed, we freeze. We lose the capacity to act. So fear steals your power by making the path forward seem too vast, too difficult, or too dangerous. The replacement tool, power, is the capacity to choose the next right step, to override the shaking hands, and to speak the words, just like our listener who started the Bible study. It's the capacity for execution.
Right. And how does fear warp our capacity for love?
Fear is inherently isolating. It causes us to retreat, to build walls, and to view the world as a threat. When we operate from fear, we cannot operate from love, because love requires vulnerability, openness, and connection. The second replacement tool, love, provides the ultimate motivation for bravery. That single father wasn't brave because he felt superhuman. He was brave because he was motivated by a genuine love for his children, which gave purpose to his exhausting daily tasks. Love makes the risk worthwhile and provides the energy to connect rather than isolate.
And finally, the third and maybe the most critical tool in our information-saturated age, a sound mind. Fear makes us catastrophic thinkers. It encourages chaotic, anxious, worst-case scenario thinking. We lose the ability to rationally assess threat and opportunity.
Exactly. A sound mind is the internal discipline that allows us to assess a situation clearly, plan the next right step, and reject the noise of internal panic. It's the mental clarity that enables wisdom. When you feel overwhelmed by the complexity of a decision, fear has likely clouded your judgment. The spirit of a sound mind allows you to take a breath, categorize the information, and choose deliberate, rational action over emotional reaction.
So when you synthesize these elements, the promised presence from Deuteronomy and the functional tools of power, love, and a sound mind from 2 Timothy, you realize you're equipped for faithful action regardless of your subjective emotional state.
That is the ultimate takeaway. You do not have to feel fearless to act faithfully. The courage we are discussing is not a burst of manufactured self-confidence. It is simply doing the next right thing, even when your voice shakes.
The voice may shake, the hands may tremble, you may still feel like you are hiding in a wine press, but the feet keep moving forward. That forward movement, that consistent, quiet obedience in the face of fear, is what defines valor in the source material's context. So as we wrap up this extensive deep dive, let's just boil this down to the 2 core takeaways that we really hope resonate with you, the learner. First, remember the Gideon principle. Identity precedes qualification. You are called mighty man of valor while you are still hiding in the wine press. Your feelings of inadequacy do not negate your potential for action.
And second, bravery is facing fear, not erasing it. It is the choice to engage, whether that looks like quiet obedience, relentless daily faithfulness to your family or your work, or simply those high-courage choices of resting, forgiving, and trusting what you cannot control.
And we want to circle back one last time to the origin of the quote, this profound definition of courage. It comes from William Moore's Motivational Guide, which analyzes Judges chapter 6, verse 12.
Right. And Moore's analysis of this concept of valor is presented as one of 33 deliberate steps designed to move the reader from ordinary faith into extraordinary obedience. It's an intentional roadmap for practical, daily valor, emphasizing that the small, incremental steps are where the biggest breakthroughs really happen.
And now, based on the reflective questions posed in the source material questions designed to push you from intellectual understanding into practical application, we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over this week. something to help guide your next action, regardless of your current emotional state.
Take a moment and reflect. What has already been affirmed about you, your identity, your role, your potential, even while you felt hidden or unqualified?
Keep that question in the forefront. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for joining us today on From Manuscript to Ministry. If today's featured book encouraged, challenged, or inspired you, we invite you to take the next step, purchase a copy, and support the author behind the message. When you invest in their work, you're not just buying a book, you're sowing into good ground and helping advance the kingdom of God through faith-filled storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Your support helps these powerful voices reach even further. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, keep praying, and keep walking boldly in your calling. God is still turning manuscripts into ministries.